right, everybody. It is right about 1 o'clock, and we got most everybody here. So let's go ahead and get started. So I hope you guys are all warm and safe and snug and toasty and so forth. If your housing situation is presenting any difficulties for you academically this semester, let me know outside of class, and we'll see what we can do to help make that any easier, at least within the scope of what I can do. Otherwise, I'm gonna assume that folks are kind of okay unless you mention otherwise. Okay, so let me know if that's a thing for you. That's not a problem, no judgment, just let me know where you're at. Okay, let's see. Last week on Wednesday, we spent a couple of hours talking about skills demonstrations. And so looking on the course website, we have, excuse me, a couple of useful guidelines, a bunch of different skills demonstrations, examples from previous students to kind of help you get a sense of just the wide diversity of skills you could demonstrate relative to your topics this semester. Everything from bowling, which, believe it or not, has a forestry component, right? What do they make those bowling lanes out of? They're very specific wood selections, straight up timber forest products, environmental interpretation taking the shape of talking about bowling. And so see Andy, a student from a couple of years ago, brings in a couple of bowling balls and talks about how bowling is done, why it's done the way it is, given the characteristics of wood. And again, for our purposes in this class, if you're super into bowling or whatever else, it doesn't necessarily have to tie directly and obviously back to a forestry thing. Other topics are pretty natural extensions back into forestry, like non-timber forest products. Touch of Nature does the Maple Syrup Festival most years. I think they had it in 2020, right before all this COVID nonsense hit. But I'm not sure they're going to do it this year. So things that are and are not direct connections are reflected in this huge smorgasbord of example skill demos for this class. Fire, steel kindling, origami, useful knots, things that we saw as examples in our class session, but also stuff like how to pack a backpack, how to pitch and load a tent during stormy conditions. We had a delicious series on how to barbecue and why barbecue is done the way it is in terms of stuff like food chemistry. Like what are you actually doing with your carefully selected charcoal briquettes and set up grilling environment or your smoking environment, right? Lots of different ways to prepare meats, but those are all done for specific reasons, not just for the sake of this is how we've always done it. It's bring a lot of skill and experience and also customization, careful customization. There's a huge range in barbecue outputs based on the kind of charcoal or non-charcoal products that you use to keep things going. Bowling, campsite selection, fishing rod, stringing. We had a fly casting demo. There's a ton of them, just a ton. Lacrosse, short casting, playing ska, how to change a tire. Okay. There are a million different things. How to change a tire, what does that have to do with forestry? Where did they get the rubber? Okay, so it can be as low key as something like whittling and be as much as how to do Alaskan mill stuff. Okay, I mean straight up obvious forestry stuff. So I uploaded several dozen of those. And over the next couple days, while we're all home and hopefully everybody's got surplus bandwidth, I'll add a bunch more optional skill demonstrations that we've captured from a whole range of wildlife refuges, parks, national forests, monument sites, battlefields, to help you understand that, beyond our classroom scope for this project, this is how the sausage gets made. This is what people are doing professionally, full-time, week in, week out at a lot of these places that have a lot of forestry careers normally attached to them. Okay, so we're gonna sort of make this just a common and ubiquitous thing. My hope is that, you know, when you go on our field trip, or if you're coming on summer camp this semester and that sort of thing, you'll see this stuff in the wild and you go, oh, this is environmental interpretation. We're not just talking with a ranger or forester or conservation police officer, do in varying degrees. That was skill to get into class, is having any kind of a list of skill demo kind of options you could take based on the kind of short list of topics that you're interested in this semester. So if you go back to the classroom posting for this, I had a chat with a couple students after class, like what even topics could I use? What could work? And the pretty quick conclusion that we arrived at was like could have kind of a skills demo associated with it. We're not just talking about random in existence, we're talking about human dynamics and things that we do and that we care about. So skills demos naturally flow from that. So if you don't have that list ready, go ahead and jam that out as fast as you can and get a copy of that turned into me. We're gonna kind of springboard off of that with kind of the first section of today. And then also today, we're gonna try to move into games a little bit and talking about game design and putting on games for your participants in the context of forest and environmental interpretation, just to kind of use that as another tool, just like a skills demo. Okay, so skills demos are like show and tell on steroids. Games are like basic questions you might ask, just interactives you might ask to your participants on steroids. And people have fun playing games. So it makes sense we should maybe think about doing that. There's a lot of good design techniques and processes and templates and stuff like that that you can use for game design. So even if you don't really consider yourself like a games player, like you're never gonna get excited about Monopoly or chess or tag or any of the gazillions of examples of games these days, that's okay. That's okay. We got plenty of resources to help make this process as easy as possible, including about literally 2,000 pages of pre-made games and activities across Interp resources like Project Wet, Project Wild, Project Learning Tree, every junior ranger booklet ever made. There's a gazillion things out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for any of this stuff. But we do have to be pretty intelligent about customizing it, making it our own for each particular interpretive experience. Okay. Before we get into first skills demo stuff and then into games, hopefully, what questions do you guys, gals, have about this assignment that we are closing off today? Just the brief list. What questions do you have about skills demos? We'll start off there and then get into our class stuff. Okay, then let's go ahead and move right along. So go ahead and if you haven't already, pull out or finish writing up that list of skill demo ideas that you have per topic. Okay, so I'm going to just create a blank Microsoft Word document and I'll share my screen and create one on the fly as we go as a part of today's interactives and get rolling here. Okay, so we got blank sheet of paper. Everyone's worst fear, no, second worst fear behind public speaking, a blank sheet of paper. Like, oh God, where do we go now? Third, death. Okay. Skill demo options per topic. Title that. And let's say my super general topic, even one someone that maybe I just got hired on for a summer stint on the Shawnee National Forest, and I'm going to be doing some interpretation along with some other responsibilities in other spheres, maybe invasive weeds management or wildland fire crew or trail crew or timber marking or property and boundary management, whatever, right? All the regular stuff that we would consider like a summer seasonal forestry position at a place like the Shawnee to tackle normally. Maybe water control measures like culverts, drainages, ramps, stream crossings, all that. Let's say in addition to those, we have a history of the Shawnee as a topic. So underneath that, under skill demonstrations, that's everything, right? So history of the Shawnee includes prehistory, so paleo-native history. So like rock shelter, flint knapping, points, and arrowheads. Like you could talk about that stuff, or you could get a couple of pieces of flint or chert or other minerals that are real good, like obsidian for making arrowheads and stuff. We don't really have a lot of obsidian, but we do have some flint. And you can pressure knap. You just hold one rock against the other and you push until you get a specific shaped flake that just goes and flies off. And doing that thing yourself is so much cooler than seeing a video. Somebody like talking more cool reading it on a page text, right? Okay. Flint knap arrowheads. Scraping and tanning hides. We could do things like fire making using native tools. How do they do it? How to smoke meats and cure proteins for later use. Soaking and prepping acorns into oak acorn flour. Let's have some cookies. All right. So just from the paleo here's what different, I don't know, halfway interesting to me at least option. And we could certainly think of some more. Let's jump forward to maybe like a colonial pioneer phase. So 1800s in the history of what would later become the Shawnee. Any of the farmstead skills. So when we go to home base at Lambton Lake, everything they're doing history farm is a thing. So those skills demos, again, overlap with living history, two different modalities that just naturally work together real well. So that's actual crop farming, it's animal husbandry. They keep mules, horses, oxen, pigs, chickens, mouse or cats. I mean, that's a half dozen domesticated species and all different working species just at the home place. It's not a huge farm, but it's enough to kind of demonstrate what each of those is used for, how they're used. They talk about in its working life, they butcher it up and eat it. Like that's how they did back then, and that's what a living history interp skills demo along that lines would look like. So they would never seek to disrespect the animal by wasting it and just burying it, you know? So all the farmstead skills, that's a whole ton of bullet points right there. And then, well, modern history of the Shawnee includes everything that we are training to do as foresters now, okay? So everything within resource extraction, field skills. People are interested in seeing how you mark timber. How do you get from one side of the Shawnee to the other without having a path, right? So land nav, map and compass, orienteering, etc. Okay, cool. So hopefully all this is pretty clear. I don't want to spend the whole class session sort of listing stuff here that you guys and gals are already kind of familiar with. We're just kind of getting it out of our heads and onto the page, so we don't have to use any RAM continuing to process that. Okay, any questions at this point? Otherwise, we'll go into like actually putting on the thing and dive back into our 5-point outlines, specifically zoomed in on a single thematic point, and then we'll set up a template for the skills demonstration. So any questions at this stage? All right, cool, good. So you could turn in something like this to the course website, and hopefully that Dropbox is all linked. Let me just make sure. Skills demonstration, working with skills demos by topic. Yep, it's right there in the announcements section. You are good to go. And a couple of folks have already turned it in. Nice work. Logan wins the award for fastest and earliest. Good stuff. Okay, so let's kind of pass around a couple of ideas for skills demos, kind of like we did at the end of the last session on Wednesday. What kinds of ideas did you guys and gals come up with? I'm super curious to hear, so I can start getting excited about some of these and seeing them later this semester. What kinds of ideas did you guys and gals come up with? Take it away.
Can you hear me?
We can now, yeah.
All right, sorry about that. What I've been working on is kind of like historical kind of recreation, like hardwood forest, for example. And then
Sweet.
like what I have so far is like compass navigation, kind of tapping a maple tree for maple syrup.
Oh, sweet. All right.
And
Literally sweet.
then I said like acorn gathering for food could be one too.
Cool. Right on. So to the extent that any of the rest of us have some pretty awesome topics that are kind of a sequence of tasks, like maple sugaring or surviving on acorns, something like that. Think about, we want to kind of chunk it down so that you have the space and the energy when you're interpreting to get into each of the meaningful steps of the process at a like a moment by moment scale. So not zoomed out so much that you're talking people through the process of gathering acorns to make staple foods out of that particular mast. But like, how would you physically gather them? And then maybe at a later step in the process, you are showing, okay, with a separate batch of gathered acorns that, maybe Connor has already soaked to leach the tannins out, the sort of brown herbal tea looking compounds, very water soluble. So you just soak them and those come out. Native Americans used to bury acorns for like a year and then unbury them, and that had leached the tannins out. And then they'd pound the rest in flour. And they pound the germ into flour. And then a separate skills demo would be something like, okay, so here's how we take the process, but still raw acorns, how we get them from looking like acorns to looking like flour ready to go. And then a separate skills demo for, here's some cookies I made, or let's bake some cookies together, as a more interesting skills demo than just getting handed a plate of cookies with acorn flour in them. Okay, so you can definitely let yourself kind of off the hook for grandiose expectations of, I'm gonna have this like hour-long end-to-end skills demo thing. Take it in smaller chunks. Break down each step of the process as its own skill demo, and then, on a guided hike talking about acorns, each step of the process can be a physically different place to help communicate sort of the flow, the sequencing of things to people with their own bodies moving around as you are moving through time and the sequence of the process. Same thing goes with maple sugaring, right? At all sorts of maple syruping operations up in like the entire northeastern United States and much of Canada. The way that they typically do maple syruping tours is they start you on, it's typically a pretty short hike because maple syruping season is pretty chilly. But they'll walk you, they'll start the hike at the beginning of the process, literally physically at the top of a hill or any kind of an elevation rise, tapping and doing that in a way that doesn't harm the tree and moving the taps from time to time. And then you follow the rubber silicone tubing down from each individual tree's collection point down to the centrally located shack as the next sequential step in the process. And you get to see, okay, it takes a lot of wood to boil literally physically tons of sap, right? So water per cubic meter is 1 metric ton. That's just the definition of a metric ton. They use water to define density and mass and stuff like that in the international system of units, not the freedom units. And water has a super high specific heat capacity. So you just gotta spend lots and lots and lots of wood and carbon into the air to boil that much water to draw the water off and concentrate down those maple and related species sugars. But people don't really understand that. It's just sort of an abstract concept, maybe just a quick mention like I just gave you verbally, unless you show them the enormous stacks of cordwood next to what is otherwise a really small shack. You don't want to be heating that entire space. You want to be heating the cauldron or the vats or the big dewars of sort of loose dilute sap. And it just works better that way. And then you head down further down the hill from the sugar shack to the kitchens where they'll pour the concentrated syrup into things like maple syrup candy molds and basically grow rock candy, but in molds shaped like a maple leaf and stuff like that is very common. And then into actually before the kitchens, they'll go into the proving and testing lab or kitchen, depending on what they call it. And you can see the different grades of maple syrup and even try some of the different grades. So you can see why does some of this stuff looks real sort of light amber? Why is it some of it almost opaque, real dark, like a whiskey color, almost like a malt beverage in some cases, and that sort of thing. Okay, so Connor, you got a couple of good topics there and lots you can do at any step of that process. And for maple sugaring, maybe for this class, you don't really need to recreate the entire process. But if it makes sense and if it's safe for us to do that, let's entertain the idea of going to Touch of Nature and checking out the operation from tip to tail, metaphorically. I mean, that's got to be more fun than watching me on Zoom. So let's do it. If that appeals to you, Connor. All right. Anybody else? Some ideas for topics and then skills demonstrations underneath that. Logan says first responder medical. So we were talking about tourniquets and splints, Israeli bandage. Right, use a TQ tourniquet, a trauma bandage, using a SAM moldable SAM splint, making your own splint, using a hemostatic bandage, combat gauze, quick clot. Backpacking topic, different sustainable trail foods, how to take care of your feet in long hikes, how to pack a bag correctly, how to pace yourself, proper hiking techniques, proper clothing attire, awesome. Body weight to gear weight, how much you should and can carry. If you're topping out at more than about 1/3 of your body mass, then you're going to be a hurting cowpoke over the long distance. Hunting, tracking injured game, hunting attire, calling game, firearm safety and weapon safety. That's a whole bunch of skills demos just in that skills demo idea. How to gut game. So how to field dress or dress it back at a check station. Not a forestry topic, but I have a passion. Okay, how to shoot a shot. Maybe demonstrating differences between traditional and Greco-Roman style wrestling. There are also other kinds of wrestling. We talked about sumo earlier in the semester, and like Turkish style oil wrestling. There's all kinds of different wrestling out there. Performing a single leg or any basic move, how to have a proper stance, how to sprawl, history to wrestling. We'd probably not want to have a skills demo for, how or why you would do a rear naked choke, because then your participants start dying one by one, and then you're back to the first responder skills. I'm kidding. Don't do rear naked chokes. All right. Awesome. So Logan has got it. Good to go. That's a great list. And we're definitely not going to have time this semester to tackle all of those. Really only just a couple. So it's okay. It's perfectly good to be excited about all of those, and also do the hard work of, kind of from here today, narrowing down to one or a couple that you want to do with excellence. I love it. Okay, so Lincoln says in chat, one that felt more challenging, railroads. Again, so this is actual skills demonstrations of any, track switching or for steam operated locomotives. That's a whole other skill set versus diesel and electric locomotion, et cetera, et cetera. How to prepare cable ties if you want to put a forestry spin on it. How to lay forestry tie or the track ties. How to replace them. There's specialized equipment that lifts a placed and working track, so that you can sort of pull a decayed or eroded tie out, shove a new one in there, and then tie it down with a new set of spikes, or using the old ones if they're still good. So it's a bunch of opportunities there, Lincoln. And you can put sort of a historic spin on this as well, because locomotion is a problem that's in the broader definition of locomotion, Lincoln. This is an issue that people have been trying to solve for about 10,000 years with the advent of the first roads across the high steppes of Asia. So locomotion, you can help people realize, hey, this is more than just planes, and more than just planes, trains, and automobiles. It's also literal horsepower. As kind of an entree to help people who are passionate about horses and car racing and stuff like that, to see how, this interest in railroads and like train locomotion kind of ties to something that maybe they're more familiar with. Pretty cool stuff. Okay. Awesome. This is great. What else? Any others? Okay, cool. Again, make sure to send me a copy of your list just so I can kind of track and see how you're doing and where you're at. This is graded in the sense that I'm checking to make sure that everybody is kind of keeping pace, but I'm not grading you for things like grammar or originality or scope and ambition and stuff like that. Just that you got something to me so I can see how you're doing. Okay, good. So I'll take any anxiety, hopefully, that you have about grammar and submitting polished work in. This is all just draft working stuff. Really, the entire first half of the semester at least. And we aren't done with any of these until you judge that you are done, having had a couple of chances to practice it with classmates and so forth. All right, great. Go ahead and pull up your working 5-point outline, and let's put in another thematic point, kind of template block for specifically skills demos. We'll bulk that out a little bit more. Let's see. Okay, take a look at chat for Lincoln's expanded ideas on skills demos for Aura. And again, perfectly fine if it's not sort of a mainline forestry topic. For this semester, we are good to go on anything by extension. Okay, so go ahead and pull out that 5-point template that you got. And I'll go ahead and pull one up as well. And what we're going to do today is just rough in a functional templated skills demonstration, just so you can think about, as you're thinking about your more specific topic and the skills demos under it, what are some of the actual logistics involved? So this is going to mostly just be a pretty straightforward recipe kind of exercise. Let's see. Yep, here we go. All right, I'll screen share mine, and yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You can use a copy of this that I put on our core website if you are interested in doing that. But again, you don't have to exactly my template, your tool. Okay, so this is, what we've seen previously, and introduction and content, and then on towards conclusion and the wrap ups or the game show, stuff like that. Is take, we're going to leave thematic point 1 on my example as is. So we've got sort of an unmodified example template for a single thematic point. Again, just a perspective on your theme statement. And from there, we're going to take thematic point 2, which is literally a copy paste of thematic point 1 and update it with 2 wherever there was a 1, and turn that content into, instead of skills demo question mark, we're going to delete the other formats and break it out a little bit more. Okay, so let's expand just the skills demo so that you don't have to do any of this translation on your own. So this is going to require templating on 2 levels. First is the preparation, the skills acquisition, so you can do the thing and do it really pretty well. It would be a bad peripheral route to persuasion for you grad students in the classroom to be demonstrating a skill without having at least a functional level of fluency in that skill. Okay, in the sense of if Logan, for example, Logan is, I'm sure, really pretty experienced and highly trained in this given his background, but with the firearm safety skills demonstrations, if Logan was fumbling the piece and not showing everybody, for example, that the chamber was clear and that the magazine was separate from the body of the thing, we can visually inspect it all together and just everybody feels safe. If Logan is not fluent in that skill at that level, that's not a great skills demo if people are needing to change their pants immediately afterwards. If he's painting targets accidentally with a muzzle that is not pointed in a safe direction, not demonstrated to be cleared. So with the skills demo, the on-site action of it is in a sequential, like a hike type thing where you have control over the order of the interpretation. The skills demo is going to have sort of the staging and setup. So first we gotta identify, label, and basically tag what we're about to do with any sort of ID information that it needs. So you're telling people, okay, this next thing we're gonna do in the next couple of minutes is specifically, I'm gonna show you how railroad workers extract a rotted tie and place a new one in without having to tear up the entire track. They can just go from one to the next, and we'll see how this very specialized equipment and skill set works to keep freight moving. So first we want to signal to the folks who are participating what exactly is going on. And then we take basically a miniaturized version of our part 1, and especially for skills demonstrations, because there is inherent risk in being outdoors. There is inherent risk in using a tool, and there's inherent risk in any kind of public contact. So we got to go back to our fundamentals with our pregame show, and to the extent that anything is needed, we're gonna maybe not spend 20 minutes on it, but just kind of reiterate the behavior expectations. Instead of telling people how to act, show people how to act, okay? By acting that way yourself. And that goes with anything as obviously potentially risky as a firearm, but also something less obviously risky like a fire steel. A fire steel is not, it's not actually more dangerous than an unloaded gun, right? They're just both hunks of metal. And without human intervention, nothing else is gonna happen. But we're going to be demonstrating some things. We're going to be making fire, right? And we don't want to have anybody close enough, for example, on a windy day during outside interpretation where a spark could carry into one of your participants' slacks, or the hem of a dress or something like that, and set one of your participants on fire. It's such a huge downer, and the paperwork takes for freaking ever. Don't ask me how I know that. Okay, so just a friendly reminder, clue of what we're doing. Definitely, it's worth uh, just 30 seconds, just reminding people on the safety piece of it. We model those expected behaviors. So I'm going to ask folks to keep their voices low, sensitive ecoacoustic habitats. So for example, in a cave, I'm never going to shout because I really need my participants to never feel like they should be shouting, especially over me as the facilitator. And that's very respectful of the bats, which have very sensitive hearing and also have very needs in terms of hibernating through a big chunk of the year in which we actually kind of enjoy nice, cool weather. Maybe a little bit warmer than today. You get the idea. Okay, so modeling expected behaviors is huge. And when you are modeling the behaviors and doing it in a way that's kind of obvious, people pick up on that. And they very commonly, the overwhelming majority, if they have kids present on your hike or at your skills demonstration, if it's not on a hike, like during station interpretation where they're just sort of wandering by, they will help manage their kids' behaviors to be more pro-social, what you're looking for. Okay, so that's a lot of talk for 3 quick bullet points, but you want to give the context for the skill. So why it's important, and then, and only then, take folks through the skill. So do the skill. And handle questions as you go. For certain kinds of skills demonstrations that require a little bit more focus, it's appropriate to ask people to hold their questions until the end of the demonstration so that you can focus on what you're doing, especially when you are interpreting with live animals. So when you see falconer, or so somebody who works with birds of prey, they got those big thick leather gloves and the leg strap and harness. They have to be paying a lot of attention to the tells of that wild species, even if it's one that's been around people for a long time, because these animals can't communicate certain concerns or fears in a cognitive sort of calm way. Sometimes they just respond or react to stimuli. So sometimes you need to be able to focus wholly on the skill demonstration. Again, especially with live animals or anything involving fire or chemicals or sharp edges or what have you. And you can establish the norm that, or the unwritten rule that, we'll tackle questions at the end. I would love to tackle your questions, but let's get through this piece, then we'll do that. So handle the questions during or after, depending. On very high skill demonstrations, it's very common to have interpreters present, one communicating with your participants and the other demonstrating the skill. So in the highest skill required demonstrations, you'll typically see that done in teams. And that helps a lot with kind of safety or medical concerns that happen because you're not trying to manage everybody who's healthy in the group as well as the person that's potentially having some kind of medical emergency. So the team approach is not unusual. And for your interpretation, think hard about, is there somebody in this class that might be interested in teaming up with you? As we are starting to sort of share some of these topics around and some of the skills demos underneath that, if anybody else's interests align with yours, let's practice the team-based approach where one person is doing the skills and interpreting, and then we can switch back and forth so both folks can try both aspects of it. But this is how it's done professionally in the real world, so we might as well practice like we're going to play, or treat it like a so-called live fire exercise. Okay, then after you've done the skill and handled the questions, it's very important to gracefully close off the skill demo. And what that means is, in the same way that the beginning of the skills demonstration does the labeling and the safety talk and modeling expected behaviors, this is a clear signal to people that, okay, this section is now done. It's very, very common because you guys and gals are demonstrating things that are so cool and interesting that one or a couple of people, maybe several people in the group, are going to be just so charged up, so jazzed about what you're doing. To do that, an outline helps you with that instead of using a sort of a rote memorized script. You can swap in a little bit more time on your skills demo and maybe cannibalize thematic point 5 down the road and not have to waste any time telling people that. You can just chop out part 5 and move on to 6 to give yourself more time on the skills demo if people are interested. In some cases, that's not that. You've demonstrated the skill and it's time to get on to the next thing, especially if there's another hike coming in behind. So it's important to very clear, a very clear sense of the start and the end of a skills demo, particularly because people get super into skills. It's so cool to see somebody highly skilled or even a master. There are reasons that people on YouTube or those like Reddit video sessions, they'll amass thousands and thousands of viewers live, and they're just throwing clay on a wheel or carving something or painting something or jamming music, right? It's all just skills demonstrations if you want to think of it. And people are into it, like, interesting. We have thousands of people watching each other play video games in this day and age, right? We live in a society. Meme. Okay, so after that, after you've closed off the sort of action of the skills demo, then we're back out to our regular template and back to assessing focus and energy level and the engagement of your participants, and then transitioning out of that skills demo and kind of reflecting what the skills demo meant or illustrated or how it influences our understanding of our theme, that overall central piece of the interp. Okay, so that's a good template. It's fairly general, so it's flexible to your needs. Outline form is a script, and hopefully this is sort of clear and sane and sensible. Any questions on the template? I'm not expecting that there are, but if there are, let's tackle those now before we get away from this and move on to the next thing. Okay, cool. It's about quarter till, so we're on the early side of our halfway point, but now's a good moment to take about a 3-4 minute break. We've been at it for 45 minutes, so please stand up, stretch, get a drink of water, do those things and over to doom scroll. Move your body. Your body is your finest instrument. Let's treat it that way. Let's have 5 minutes, okay? All right, guys and gals, it is 10 till, about 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and get back into it. I hope connection here for us to get through with some good meaning here. All right. Let's talk. So we're switching now from skills demonstrations, and our next move for those is going to be, of course, to start developing any one of those off of your list that you're turning in today to or over the next couple of days, right? Our deadlines are kind of flexible in this class, but generally keep up if you can. And our next move is to start laying in the resources, the logistics, the actual equipment, and practicing the skills that you would be demonstrating looking ahead to some warmer weather in the semester. So we've had kind of a colder, wetter winter early part of the semester than usual. And that's kind of costing us a little bit of the early class sessions where we're starting to practice this stuff and just kind of get comfortable with it, right? Whittling a lot of the stuff that we'll be able to do in class, any of these skill demos that you're able to bring on campus, it just gets easier and easier each time you do it, right? So this is now, we're definitely into the period where you want to kind of winnow out or select a few from the many that you're interested in actually trying out and starting to build that single thematic point worth of skills demo around it. Okay, so again, not a whole process, just one good step, one high quality step. And whatever, assembling whatever gear or equipment or even facility, for example, with maple syruping, we'd want to maybe make some arrangement with Touch of Nature to show what that's like on site in terms of the skill demo instead of talking about it in a PowerPoint. That's not really a skills demo at that point. Okay, so that's your next move on those. While you are working on those, we'll enrich our brains a little bit with game design, one of my favorite topics, and one that is pretty visible in today's life. Last week, just briefly alluded to the idea that sites like Facebook and Instagram, Google Maps, Yelp, they are all using basic human cognitive processes to get you a little bit more excited about their product so they can turn you into money. And what that is called formally is called gamification. So looking for reviews on Yelp, discovering the endlessly scrolling photos and users supplied reviews and so forth on Yelp. Those are game-like things. There's a behavioral feedback loop. There's a score associated with it, like how many stars is this product? How many Michelin stars is this restaurant? How many visitor left review stars is this restaurant? How many reviews has it had? How many thumbs up or likes or hearts have we gotten on insert social media platform name for each post or story or whatever? That's all borrowed from game design, and our brains really respond, which is why they use it and why these are billion-dollar with a B companies, and a few of them now, Amazon, Apple, increasingly others, they are trillion-dollar companies. So that's value with 12 zeros after it. That's just a lot. That's a lot of space bucks. That's a lot of wooden nickels for us foresters. So let's talk about game design and how to use that responsibly and ethically in the context of interpretation, not so much in the context of keeping your eyeballs on Facebook so that you see as many ads as possible and they make as much money off you as possible. Can you tell that I really hate advertising? I worked in advertising for a little while, never again. All right, so let's wrestle with it. The idea with game design is that we're going to take things that are otherwise static and passive, meaning unchanging, and you sort of flowing information to somebody, and making them active and dynamic, interactive, and iterative. So each of those four things is a different design goal, but they all sort of reinforce each other, okay? So we're going to use We're going to use a lot of examples, and I'm old and boring and just whatever, just kind of decrepit. Like I turned 40, you know, and it's over. It's done. Like I'm just going to hang it up. So I'm going to use examples of games and game design to help sort of illustrate this stuff. But some of my examples are probably pretty old. So if you are playing a game that is newer and more recognizable than whatever example I'm talking about, I want you to interrupt me right here in the middle of me talking and supply that example. We'll add it to our list. Okay. So think about the basic, regardless of the graphics, either printed in the case of a board game or on screen in case of a video game, or on screen in case of a video game. Think about what games look like. They tend to not have a lot of words. They tend to have a lot of motion graphics. A lot of computer games, it's very important to some of those players that the motion graphics are happening at 120 frames per second, 120 hertz, for crystal clear high-speed motion. The colors tend to be real saturated, so bright, vibrant, vivid colors instead of kind of muted grays, where everything is very desaturated or monochrome. And the reason that games do that is because the sort of instinctual level pre-processing that our brains do picks up on those bright color stimuli, those motion stimuli, and we immediately evaluate that for threat and interesting things. So out in nature, brightly colored, and we are looking for poisonous frogs and snakes. You know, a lot of poison are bright color, and so our brains pick up on that and they use that information. And so anything that you can do to use a gamified, more creating aspect in your design makes it feel more like a game, makes it feel a lot more interesting to people. Okay, so it is exactly for this reason that my PowerPoints are straight black and white and not a ton of text. So when something does pop up like a video or an image, a lot of attention goes to that instead of on the maybe the less important things where it's just a text label. Okay, so we are wired to do some of the following things at kind of any given moment while we're awake. Okay, collect things. Games like Animal Crossing, crafting games like Minecraft, as we watch our inventories fill up with more and more stuff that feels good, we're wired to collect things. We're also wired to collect abstracts. So abstract things like points. Most video games have some kind of a point score. Almost all sports games have a point score. The number of thumbs up on a Facebook post or other social media is accruing points because our beyond instinctual, our forebrains, our reasoning centers understand those scores to be mapped onto social connections like people's approval, popularity, safety within, perceived safety within our peer group, right? So if more of our friends are liking something or upvoting something that we have supplied to them through social media, we get a real buzz from that. It's a literal neurochemical shot of kind of the approval chemical out of that, okay? So games like Cookie Clicker, if you've ever played that one, where the whole point of the game is just to click your mouse a lot and you just watch your score go up. And then, you know, your grandma becomes this horrible eldritch space abomination and destroys all of reality later in the game. but that doesn't change the fundamental mechanic of Cookie Clicker. It just feels good to watch the number of cookies that you've made by clicking go up. So accruing points, gathering points is much like collecting things, but more abstract. We love to collect feedback from each other in a social context, answering the how am I doing question. So can any of you think of a game where the core mechanic, the loop of the game, involves feedback from other players? Can you think of any games like that that are perennially popular?
I used to play a game called Egg Incorporated on my phone during the summer when I didn't have service. And it was kind of just like that cookie clicker game where you would update or you'd upgrade your barns and like your delivery service. And it was like really nice graphics. So it was kind of just like that, like a feedback, like, you know, like, what do you call it? Like achievement loop.
Yep, very much so. All right, so that was called Egg something? What was that?
Egg, yeah, Egg Incorporated, and you had chickens that would lay eggs, and so you would like upgrade your barn and stuff like that.
Nice. Okay, so Farmville is another example of this as well. And harvesting strawberries. Farmville's shutting down, by the way, if any of you got addicted to that way back in the day when you were little kids. All right, any games that you are aware of that have a social feedback? So you're getting input from other players. Loop. If we can approach this topic area, how about drinking games? So drinking games on college campuses commonly or around them is a very hopefully social thing. Like if you're alone playing beer pong against a wall in a basement, that's just maybe a little sad, and let's get you some help. But drinking games very commonly have a social feedback, sort of a social reinforcement loop in them. So other games that are sort of drinking game adjacent, like Never Have I Ever, is a social feedback game. You are normalizing your set of experiences against other people who are saying, yeah, no, that's bizarre. I've never done anything like that. I've never even heard of that. I didn't know the body bent that direction, versus, you know, 3 people in the group that are like, oh yeah, I've totally done that many times. Social feedback collection is a powerful, powerful game mechanic. Other games that collect feedback, they can be sports games as well.
I'm playing a different game now called Stardew Valley, and that game that game has like townsfolk that you get points for socializing with, and like you can share your farm and have other people come online and play with you, and like it's all farming and mining and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a real good example. Poker is another social feedback game. You're playing cards, but you're really playing people's tells and reactions. If you want to think of it that way, for those of you familiar with like poker, so Stardew Valley. Dwarf Fortress is another feedback type game where you're trying to keep all of those horribly doomed dwarves alive. All right, we are also wired to enjoy exchanging things. So World of Warcraft has a famous auction house dynamic. EVE Online has famous and huge a straight up rivals the size of some third world countries. Some of these online games are huge, and exchange is a big deal. Some people love like the bartering and information arbitrage, which is finding something that selling the case across a lot more. So Robinhood has made exchange and accruing points in the forms of fiat currency a thing lately with GameStop and AMC theaters stocks, right? So some of these games have pretty real world looking applications and so forth. All right. What about, can you think of any games where part of the fun of the game is customizing? Like show of hands, hands emoji or video with, have you ever customized your character in anything from like, like the Mass Effect series to your toon on screen in Minecraft with a custom skin? Have you ever paid, a couple of bucks of real world currency to get some like weapon skin in, I don't know, Destiny or any of those shoot and loot games, stuff like that? And it's addictive. Like it's super addictive. If you're familiar with the old, it's still running, I believe, old MMO, Second Life, the entire game is customization. There's no built-in game mechanics. It's more of a virtual world platform, and people trick out their avatars. You can be quadrupedal. You could show up on everybody else's screen as a My Little Pony character or whatever, and depict your OC, your original character, if you want to. So customization is a powerful desire. It lets us, lets anybody kind of experience how the other half lives, but without the real world time and cost involved. Like in Grand Theft Auto Online, you can have a submersible helicopter rocket car, and a custom paint job and a 15-car garage. I think you can buy like nuclear submarines in Grand Theft Auto Online, because why not, right? You can customize these things quite a bit, as well as what your character is wearing and all of that. So customization is a very powerful sort of inbuilt desire. It's a question of what psychologists would call actualization. That is putting into motion your innate desires for yourself, your appearance, your possessions, even if they're virtual possessions inside of the context of a game, and so forth. There's a very, very, very powerful inbuilt instinct, even beyond just a desire, to advance, to expand your capability, to grow. So if you've heard of Pokemans, as they say in Letterkenny, this is a billion-dollar game franchise. It's a whole series of them, right? Sun and Moon, Emerald, Ruby, Sapphire, Diamond. I don't even know what they are all anymore. But how many thousands of different Pokemon are there, and how much time have people, even like sitting here in this class, how many hours have you sunk into Pokemon Go, or any of the Game Boy based Pokemon games, training them up and advancing them? And it's just maybe a slightly bigger multiplier. Sometimes it unlocks a skill that the Pokemon or your own avatar can do. All role-playing games have advancement and progression, where you can do things, cast spells or use a bigger weapon or dual wield in ways that you couldn't at level 1 on Newbie Island. And finally, we are also wired to seek completion for things. So if you have an Xbox or PlayStation, you're very familiar with the idea of badges and achievements. Those are just game mechanics sort of slapped on external to the core sequence of the game, playing the game from level 1 to level 20 if it's a 20-level game. The badges and achievements are sort of added in there for so-called replay value. Okay, so You could think of the Junior Ranger badge that people earn in national parks at visitor centers. That's a literal physical, like plastic badge you can pin to a kid's shirt to help them understand, hey, you are beyond what you were when you started this Junior Ranger thing. You've taken a pledge, you've completed some activities, you've been out there in our national park discovering things. You are not the same person. You have achieved something. Okay, so we badge that. And back in the bad old days of Web 2.0 design in like 2005 to 2012, 2013 or so, you saw a lot of badges on websites. These days, we would call them notifications. So notifications are a dark pattern or an anti-pattern where you get the initial stimulus of, oh, I see a badge, I must have done something good. And then you realize, oh, there's a number in that little red circle. That means I've got a message that I missed. Oh, that's bad. I better get that. I have some urgency. So do you see how software and website and app and game designers, they use our brains not really against us, but they use our pattern recognition to spot and instantly understand what a badge looks like and represents, or a notification, little red circle, instantly understand what that represents. And they cue a behavior, a response, or in the case of a game, sometimes an emotional response of elation, like I've completed something, I've got this badge, and so forth. We can take those lessons, we can take those design patterns, at least the good ones, and borrow them and make our own games, or gamify without taking people through a game, our interpretation. Okay, so collecting things, accruing points, collecting feedback, exchange, customization, advancing, expanding capability, growing, leveling up, and completing things, achievements, badges. Those are all things that we're basically wired to do, and games just bring those all together and add some easily recognizable, easy to learn patterns and introduce things like strategy and tactics. Okay, so components of a good game. There's no great way through this but to talk through it. So here we go. All right, so the first component of a good game is a good, strong central metaphor. What is this game sort of a proxy of? Or what is this game a little model of? What is this game a miniature, fast, cheap, fun distillation of? So chess is a metaphor for medieval. It was brought to Western Europe by Empire, or Muslim Empire, expanding outward from the Eastern Mediterranean to as far west and north as places like Spain. They brought chess with them, and chess, the metaphor is chessboard is a battlefield, and you got a king and a queen, you got some knights, you've got pawns to the footmen, you've got rooks and bishops. So those things were anglicized or westernized, Christianized into a more recognizable form by Western society. And even to this day, it's a big deal for chess masters across the world to play chess. It's just a metaphor for battle, but it's a fast, cheap, safe metaphor for an actual land battle, which is otherwise pretty bloody. Okay, so every game has some kind of a central metaphor, and any time where you game or gamification in Interp, you want to have a firm grip on that central metaphor and never stray away from it. Otherwise, your game's going to get too big, too bloated, too unwieldy, too unrecognizable. Like if you're talking about wolf reintroduction in the West, play a game like Sharks and Minnows with wolves and prey species, and don't add a bunch of stuff unrelated to that. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward, and I'll talk about how to do that. Okay, so Among Us, the game Among Us, which is a super meme saturated game right now. Does anybody know what Among Us is? And take a guess at what the central metaphor of Among Us is. The answer is easier than you think.
I mean, having played Among Us. Oh, go ahead.
That there's
evil among us. There's people we can't trust, I guess, is the central metaphor. Because you're always looking for the imposter, the guy who is not one of you.
Got it in one, exactly. And that's a very clear, recognizable idea that some people are dangerous or untrustworthy. And then you start filling in some details like they're on a spaceship and everybody's got tasks they got to do. Otherwise, the spaceship kind of goes off the rails and everybody dies. But the basic idea is just that. It's not even, doesn't even have to be a full sentence. It's just some people are untrustworthy and dangerous. And so the untrustworthy one runs around inside the game and kills people. So it's a faster, safer, hopefully more fun experience than being on a ship where you're being stalked by your shipmates. Okay. The Lord of the Rings games, there's a bunch of different ones. They are a metaphor for World War II. The Monopoly game is a direct translation of the social dangers of free market capitalism as taken by early 20th century moral reformers and refined into a board game format. The point of that game is to break hearts. It's to crush people's feelings as they are ground to dust under the scales eventually tipping in one player's favor and they just blow everybody else out. And it might be a quick slaughter. It might be a slow, painful decline into bankruptcy and losing the game. But the central metaphor is power corrupts. Money is power, and absolute power, just fabulous wealth, can corrupt pretty hard. All right, so central metaphor is a huge deal, and always hang on to this one. This is one of the key design elements for a game. Any game, even if you're adapting one that's already made, because you're in a hurry and you're an interpreter and you're doing a bunch of stuff, you want to make sure that everything hooks into the central metaphor. So the central metaphor for a game in Interp, it's not necessarily your theme. It's probably just one of your thematic themes. Around a single little idea and keeps you more effective in that way. Every game has some kind of an emotional basis. So the game is designed to elicit some kind of emotional response. And the central metaphor usually is a pretty good clue as to the emotional basis for any particular game. So emotions like happiness, surprise. Surprise can be positive, it can be negative. Fear, some games are based on fear and evoking a sensation of it. Some games are about anger. Others are about disgust or sadness. Fiero, which is that everybody up out of their seats at the World Cup or the Super Bowl when a crazy, amazing, rare play happens, or the Stanley Cup. Fiero is the, I'm firing on all cylinders. This is amazing. This is everything I hoped life could be. That's called Fiero as a formal emotional state. Some games are designed to trigger the emotional state of greed, right? So some of these gatherings, some of these accumulation games are like that, okay? So every game has rules and mechanics, and you want to tailor the rules and mechanics, and they're separate things. We'll talk about which each is. You want to tailor the rules and mechanics to get your players, your participants in Interp, from introducing the idea of the central metaphor of the game to that emotional response, right? So if we get people in the emotions, then we've got them. They're focused, they're responding to the situation that you're helping to create, the dynamic that you're helping to create in interpretation. And rules and mechanics are just nuts and bolts of how you get there. All right, so rules are the bounds on the time and the space behavior, the scope, so to speak, of your game. Like if you're playing a Sharks and Minnows style game to illustrate wolf and prey population dynamics in Interp, the rules, part of the rules are how big is the playing space? Like nobody run out into the parking lot, A, because you're gonna get plastered and turned into a thin red mist as somebody's Hummer 2 drives through. And B, like we need to keep it bounded in space so that the prey have to contend with the predators. All right, so use rules to scope the game. Use rules to scope the game in time as well. Like the rules for a baseball game are 9 innings, however long that takes. Rules for things like soccer games are time-based. So whatever that time basis is, rules help us keep it sane. So for interpretation, we're generally doing short, quick, high-impact games instead of spending an hour playing a game, because if we're doing our jobs right, the point we're going to get to, bringing people from the central metaphor to the emotional basis of the response embedded in the game, we should be doing that pretty quickly. If it takes us an hour to get there, something's gone horribly wrong. All right, so mechanics are different than rules. Mechanics, how does the game evolve? Mechanics are the options, the strategy, the choices that the game presents as scoped by the rules. Okay, so strategy, tactics, all that stuff. So rules, scope, and the boundaries of the game, and things like the ending condition. How do you win the game? There's a rule about that. How do you lose the game? If that's possible, there's a rule about that, and so forth. And are 2 halves or 4 quarters. We're going to have X number of rounds until we run out of time, or what have you. Okay, so rules are scope, mechanics are how you get through. And for our class, to the extent that you're taking notes, one of our most important criteria for game design and game practice, and a couple of different drafts throughout the semester and so forth, limit yourself to 3 sentences and 30 seconds, whichever comes first, to lay out your rules and mechanics. Okay, so what this is going to do is save you from going too far down a game that is too intricate and sophisticated. If people can't understand fully what to do and what the limits of the game are in about 3 sentences or 30 seconds of speech, you're going to lose them, because we just can't hold that much text in our heads at once. Okay, this is reflected in how we read. So we read not individual letters, not even individual words. We read the physical shape on the screen or the page of a couple of words at a time, and our brain processes that little chunk into some actual semantic meaning. But most of us, unless we are highly trained speed readers, can't read a whole line of text 80 characters wide, so newspaper column wide, at once. Phrase, 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 phrase. We're really good, we're really fast at reading those in that way. In the same way, we can hold some phrases worth of meaningful semantic or symbolic information in our brains as you, the interpreter, are explaining to us, all right, here's how we're going to play this game. Okay, so this is a hard part of this eventual kind of chain of assignments, right? 3 sentences, really, Park? 3 sentences? Yeah, really. Okay, and that will save you a lot of pain later, I promise. That's a good thing. Okay, the next hallmark of most all games, not every game, but this is a key characteristic of a game that you only want to break on purpose. If the central metaphor of your game involves unfairness, break this one. But if it doesn't, absolutely do not break this one. The outcome that you're going to have when players don't have equal initial footing or equal initial opportunity in your game is they're going to immediately realize, wait a minute, this is not fair. This is stacked against me. Or even worse, you'll have somebody realizing, oh gosh, this game is stacked in my favor. I'm going to exploit this and break everybody else's heart playing the game. Okay, so in soccer, everybody has equal play on the field. In baseball, everybody has an equal number of potential at-bats in the beginning, right? And if you have a great pitcher, then you shut out the other team and they have just that minimum number. But everybody's guaranteed a fair game at the start. Now, in some kinds of interpretation, the message is life is not fair. Sharks and minnows is not a fair game because you start with somebody as the wolf, or tag is not a fair game. You start with somebody who's it, their role is different than everybody else's, and in certain variations or flavors of tag, you know, like chain tag or freeze tag, some types of freeze tag, the game eventually tips towards whoever's it, and then the game state just collapses. There's nobody else left to tag, and that round of the game is over. Okay, so where the message, the central metaphor of the game, involves unfairness, break the equal initial footing, the equal initial opportunity characteristic of games. Otherwise, keep everything perfectly fair. And that may mean artificially leveling your playing field so that an adult competing against a child in the game doesn't get a little too into the game and sort of lose hold of the interpretive value of what the larger experience is all about. And, you know, in a foot race, just absolutely blows away the 4-year-old kid and wins, but not for any good reason, right? So consider the emotional state again. What's the emotional basis for your game, and how can you use equal initial footing to help everybody get to that emotional basis? Okay, so this is also called player normalization. So player normalization is the part of equal initial footing where you sort of clamp a high skill player or high capability player's ability to blow everybody else out of the water, metaphorically, and or you bring others up to that player's level. Okay, so lots of games have handicaps involved, and player normalization is the goal of that handicap, so that adjusting the high skill player's ability to score much higher than everybody else down to a range where everybody else can fairly get to, then everybody's playing on a level playing field, so to speak. Okay, cool. Next, balanced team play versus competition. Your game, depending on your thematic point, your theme, you may have everybody on the same team. It's total cooperative. We've all played some games like that. It may be every person for themselves. That is total competition style. So the competition can also be against teams, which are cooperative internally and competitive externally, right? So whatever your kind of message is for your interpretation, let that choose for you, the interpreter, the team play versus competition. So for example, in Lincoln's case, when he is talking about interpreting railroads, you could have different teams of players among your participants as competing railroad companies. And then within each one of those teams, they're trying to work together to accomplish whatever goal that Lincoln sets for them in the context of that quick little game. Okay, so the emotional message for the winners is going to be a little bit different than for the losers in games that involve competition. That's just how it goes, right? It's generally less fun to lose. And then you get into the world of online trolls, and that's a whole other thing. But trolls are also provoking an emotional response. They are turning the game to their own ends. You want your game to have a clear victory condition. So that is, again, part of the rules, where this lays out the goal for everybody and signals what is desirable about the sort of outcome of the process of your central metaphor. Like, what are we all working towards in this game? So in Risk, the game is to take over all of the countries of the world in sort of a military simulation board game. And everybody knows when Risk is over definitively, when the whole board is one color. Okay, so for any games that you have played in the past, what's the victory condition? Give me some examples. In various games, how do you know when the game is over? What's the victory condition? Which also tells you, what are we working towards? What are we aiming for? What are we strategizing around? Or to tie back into chat, what what's the victory condition for D&D? This is definitely a trick question for different kinds of players. For some, it's telling a good story, and maybe their beloved player characters die heroically in the final battle against the big bad evil guy, the BBEG. In other groups of D&D players or Pathfinder players, the goal is much more to field a highly optimized player character, where you know, you use the class and race and equipment combination of mechanics inside the rule set of that game. And the point of the game, the satisfaction of the game for those players is to be able to smite the bad guy harder than anybody else. And they don't really care about story or role playing or any of that stuff. They just want to roll some dice and kill some monsters. Both valid endpoints. But it's important that a narratively focused D&D group share the goal of telling a good story, whether or not their characters get pasted, versus making sure everybody's on the same page about, hey, we're more of a gaming group than a role-playing group. Let's see how much loot we can get, how much nice loot we can get, and how well we can slaughter our foes and hear the lamentation of their women and ride off on their horses, or whatever the old Conan quote is. Okay. So in a lot of games, like it says, it's the last one standing or first to finish. So King of the Hill style games. It's changed a bit recently to be a bit more of what you consider to be the end, or when you choose to have a conclusion. Good call. For a lot of games, Ellie says victory is usually based on when time runs out, and whoever has the most points, highest score, wins. If it's using a point system, absolutely right. You got it. For games like Minecraft, which are much more open-ended or sandbox style games, the endpoint is kind of whatever you choose for it to be during that particular session. Maybe it is, you know, gathering a bunch of those harder to find resources. Maybe it is playing through the narrative of the game and killing the end dragon. Maybe it is, you know, building stuff. So customization of your world, not so much of your character. And at some point you say, okay, enough. I've built enough of my Minecraft world. I'm pretty satisfied with this, and so on and so forth. All right, so games have endpoints. We build the entire game around the central metaphor and try to sync up the selection of game's endpoint, its victory condition, with the emotional state that you're trying to towards. Examples, guys and gals. Okay. Let's see. For your victory condition, you can have it be one clear and unambiguous goal, like this is how this game is going to go. This point, the whole mess is that there are multiple parallel victory conditions. And so you would lay that out in the game, and everybody can apply their strategy across the whole game and their tactics in each round or each moment by moment decision according to reach whichever victory condition appeals to them at that time. Okay, so your victory condition, you got to be able to define that in one sentence or less. Your victory condition is, again, part of your rules, and you get 3 sentences for that. And once you're a professional interpreter, feel free to break our class rule and make longer, more involved rules and see how many people you can drive away that way. But you get the idea. Okay. Next, this is the heart and soul of actually the experience of playing the game. So every game has iterative feedback. So again, you have strategy, which is your planned track throughout the entire process of the game. And then you have tactics, which are the moment by moment choices, or round by round, or turn by turn, or frame by frame in bowling, or what have you. As each of those turns or moments or rounds or frames rolls out through the game, you're making choices within entirely just the context of that round. And you have a sense of how things might be going overall, but really your ability to manipulate the game state or your character within it, or yourself, you're running around getting chased by the wolf in your Sharks to Minnow hybrid game. You want to keep those rounds real short, like for our purposes, 5 to 15 seconds. Super short. And what that does is it allows your players to iterate their feedback on their strategy and tactics. So if somebody chooses a direction they want to move through the game and it's not going to get them to the victory condition, they need to know that fairly quickly so they can course correct in round 2 or round 3 or round 4. If somebody's locked into a tough choice that they or a bad choice that they made in the context of the game's mechanics in round 1, and it's a 5-round game and they can't change it, they got 4 more rounds to just nosedive and lose while they watch everybody else pass them up. That's a very frustrating feeling for a lot of people. And so you don't want to give folks kind of a negative game experience by locking them into something with very long, slow rounds and so forth. So 5 to 15 seconds is really good for memory games or matching games where you have people maybe competing to identify, counter different kinds of acorns, for example, based on their shape and color and characteristics. You know, maybe it's better to flip several and then flip them back after 5 seconds only, instead of flip them over and everybody kind of waits for a minute and then, all right. So 5 to 15 seconds gives some urgency. It assigns importance to the interactions, the changes in the game state that are happening just in that turn or that round. Kind of builds excitement a little bit, builds focus and energy, and kind of brings people into the game. So short, many cycles instead of long, few cycles. Okay, cool. Most games have progression. So in checkers, somebody is eventually running out of checkers pieces, and the other typically more skilled player just eventually dominates the whole board. In all of the Mario games, the progression is the first level is super easy. There are relatively few moving hazards and so forth. You're kind of just learning how to play the game. By the last level, World 9-9 or whatever, there's all sorts of stuff happening. I mean, there are cannon shells and there are bouncy things and there are pits, and you've been swimming for part of the time and you've got this hat with wings on it and you can fly and cough up fireballs and all sorts of stuff. The beginning of the game doesn't feel like the end of the game, and that's good. You want things to advance, to progress, and give folks that sense of progression throughout the game. Even if it's only a 3 to 5 minute long game, we can absolutely have a clear and vivid sense of progression from the beginning of the game to the end, okay? So as people's point totals rack up, as their wealth accumulates inside the game, even if it's just play money, that's exciting. You see a progression. I'm seeing my investments, my risky strategy pay off towards the end, or, oh, shoot, halfway through, somebody, took my home base in StarCraft, and now my crystals and Vespene gas are not accessible to me. That wasn't like that at the beginning of the game. Things are happening and changing the game state. That's progression. And hopefully that progression sort of funnels people towards the end of the game, the end state, that victory condition. All right, so you could analogize or use an analogy to explain games or good game design like a beer. Every beer has a nose, a head, and a nice long finish. Games are the same way. So the nose is the scent, the bouquet, the olfactory feedback as you, even before you're drinking, you get a sort of a sense of anticipation of what this particular beer is going to taste like based on the smell, unless you have COVID-19 and anosmia. So what this means is a really good game is super quick to learn. And that's why we're doing 3 sentences, 30 seconds worth of rules. So even a child can easily hold 3 sentences worth of content in mind and play the game, especially if it's a familiar game that's adapted for your use. So good games are quick to learn, but a lot of the best games, they're slow to master because there's enough meaningful choice for the players in the game that there's not one single super optimized way to do it, and you're going to blow everybody else away. So tic-tac-toe, easy to learn, super easy to master. There are deterministic states in tic-tac-toe where you will win every time. But chess is the opposite. There are quadrillions of possible chess matches within the first, 5 moves, quadrillions of them, right? You're never gonna fully master chess. Neither is anybody else. So a good game is quick to learn, slow to master, and progression and the options that people have throughout the progression of the game define that, okay? So again, the advancement mechanisms are collecting points or items, customizing, personalizing, learning feedback, competing, exchanging, trading, bartering, exploring, the narrative. If your game is based around a story, stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. That's progression. Okay. Cool. What else? Another aspect of progression is difficulty. So you as the interpreter are making a lot of choices for your players, sometimes changing these choices on the fly in response to the situation and how it's playing out in terms of tweaking the difficulty. So you can, in a game like Tag or Sharks and Minnows, where there's a physical utilization of space and people moving around, you can widen out that space. That changes the game dynamic, changes the difficulty. You can bring it way down. If you're interpreting a situation where the floor is lava, which is a super recognizable game from everybody's childhood, you can tweak the difficulty of that game on the fly by adding or removing safe spots for people to move from the beginning of the game to the end point, the goal, the victory condition, platform, or space. Super easy to do that. And so you would not arbitrarily change the difficulty of the game. You're doing that to make the game accessible for players that are struggling in some way. You're making the game harder for savvy players that are gonna blast through a little bit too easily. So maybe you play the game once and it took 1 minute. Then you say, okay, but what about this aspect of insert thematic point, sort of your subtopic for this game? What about this aspect of it? And how would our game change if we try it again, but with this little twist on it? Okay, the Mario series does this. They introduce a new mechanic or enemy or moving or bouncing platform, and then they elaborate that. They let you practice it a little bit, and then they twist it with some kind of a boss that uses some variation of that enemy or that moving platform or that special kind of fireball or whatever. Okay, so you can add difficulty into the progression of a game and make the game hard at first to easy, easy at first to hard, or you can have the game going and you are tuning the difficulty up and down as you go according to your needs for the interpretation. All right, cool. So progression, part of that is difficulty. The central metaphor of your game is also going to give you the need for representative tokens and roles. So in chess, there's a piece called a king because a king has a role on a battlefield. That role is a little bit less clear in classical medieval warfare, but that was part of the translation process from making it recognizable from Muslim audiences to Western Christian audiences. They needed some royal figure that folks would recognize, and so there's a queen on the battlefield, which is a little bit confusing, but it makes sense at the time. There are knights, and they're shaped like horses, typically in most chess sets, in chess, because knights have a role on the battlefield, and so they should have a role on the chessboard. So whatever your tokens are, if it's a game that uses tokens on a board or a tabletop or an open grassy area outside, make those tokens look like what they represent. Otherwise, people are going to be trying to remember, okay, so the yellow discs are fish and the blue cubes are, I don't remember. So just explain that to me one more time, right? Like if it looks like a fish, they're going to get that, okay? So make items look like the items, make rewards look like the reward, make a coin as a point counter look like a coin so that people understand, okay, more is generally better. It means more flexibility. I can spend this coin or it just represents my score. Rewards, traps, enemy or NPC characters in your game, make them look like, make them act like and sound like, give them names that make sense according to that central metaphor, okay? Remember, all this stuff is just inside your head. It's all just a good idea in your head until you can make it visible and tangible for people. And the way that we do that with people directly instead of using tokens is we give them meaningful roles. Okay, so in sharks and minnows, somebody's going to be a shark, and that name, that one word name, defines their behavior in relationship to all of the minnows. And the minnows are defined by their name in terms of their relationship to each other and to their adversary, the predator, the shark. Okay, so when you have a game that uses tokens, make them look like, sound like, act like, be named as the thing they represent. And when you have roles instead of tokens, or maybe both, make sure that those roles map onto groups of all sizes, odd numbers and even numbered groups, and big groups and small groups. Okay, so that seems pretty obvious, but until you try out some of these designs that you might be thinking of sooner or later, this is one that often catches us: odd versus even groups. Okay, and we'll have either or both at various times during the day as interpreters. Think about your game's internal economy as the next distinct characteristic. So does your game, what's the flow of resources being managed in your game? So in chess, your resources are your military forces, your knights, your pawns, king, queen, bishops, rooks, all that. In World of Warcraft, your resources are time. It takes time to cool down from each spell that you cast or action that you use according to your class, so that you trigger the thing and then you have to wait a certain amount of time, and the power of any particular skill is balanced against how long you have to wait to be able to cast it again. In our current game here at home, Gloomhaven, the flow of resources is literally coins on the battlefield. And the other flow of resources that we have is our action economy. We are losing cards from our hand to make our characters on the map or in the little dungeon do what they need to do within a certain number of turns or rounds before we run out of cards, and then that scenario is over. And if we hit the victory condition before we run out of cards, awesome. So we're managing two eternal economies in that cases: coins on the board that we're trying to get, while also fighting off monsters and stuff like that, and the number of cards that we have in our hand. Okay, so your internal economy for a game like Sharks and Minnows, where there are no tokens, there are no material objects, that's basically your physical energy level. Like, you can't be sprinting continuously for a 3-minute game of Sharks versus Minnows. You have to marshal your strength, your air, for anaerobic sprinting, and maybe aerobic kind of jogging around, staying on the far end of the arena from the shark as you guys circle each other. Okay, you as the interpreter, just like with the difficulty of the game, you can tweak the internal economy of the game, whatever it is, however you need to. Okay, so in Bizarro World, where you're using chess as your game, you wouldn't, because chess takes too long. But you as the interpreter can add pieces to either team. You can take pieces away. In college, we used to play a variant of Risk called Chaos Risk, where if you rolled 3 6s on the 3 dice, a nuclear weapon detonated where the battle happened, and the fallout made that country inaccessible permanently for the rest of the game. That was an interpreter-like tweak to the game mechanics that we use to add a little bit of chaos and risk into the game Risk. Okay, so action economy is for games like XCOM. A lot of turn-based tactics games use an action economy. A lot of accumulation games use a money economy, and so forth. Let's see. We gotta stop here in about 1 more minute, so let me stop it right there. I'll hang around a bit for questions about game design so far. Hopefully you've got a couple of notes in there. I'll post this lecture-y stuff online, so you can kind of see what this text is and print it out and that sort of thing if you want to. And we'll open up kind of a new section on the course website with examples of game design from previous students and stuff like that, so you can kind of see where we're going with this as well. All right, so we'll pick it up right here on Wednesday. Looks like classes are canceled tomorrow. I just got a text message about that while we were chatting. So that's cool, but we're probably back on for Wednesday, at least at this point so far, so whatever. Again, I'm around for questions. If you got to go to another class, I will see you later. See you next time.
I wanted to ask one thing that I was thinking about.
Yeah.
During class, and if I'm like jumping ahead for another class, we can just save it for then. But
Okay.
like one thing that I've experienced in like a park campy setting is the GBI like low challenge like team building exercises, and I just
Yeah.
want to know how that plays into this type of interpretive game, or what the distinction is.
Yeah. So challenge games and team dynamics games they're gamified icebreaker discussions. That's all it is. And a lot of those icebreaker games are not games in the true like textbook definition sense. Like they don't check all of these boxes that we're going through right now. But most of them have most of them, you know, and in particular with facilitated games like that, the leader, the guide, the presenter, the facilitator, all, you know, all those interchangeable terms, they are definitely sort of manipulating the game state to get towards the point of those, which is not to win the game. It's to help people feel more comfortable, feel more open and trusting of their group members. It's for them to feel more open and comfortable with that facilitator, who is in most all cases a stranger to these people. And you know, you can't stay in that sort of awkward stranger danger phase for long in a professional context. You got to get right to where everybody's feeling good, having a good time, focused. They're all together, they're meshing or gelling well with each other, and so forth. So they use game-like exercises, these icebreaker type games. Challenge courses are very game-like in each of the elements. It's not one big game as you go. So yeah, you're definitely recognizing exactly what we're talking about in a slightly different and very adjacent context, right? So environmental interpretation is going to absolutely borrow from challenge courses, high ropes, you know, trust falls and stuff like that. And we'll even do some of those specific activities where that helps to reinforce the interpretation. But more commonly, they're pretty adjacent to each other. Yeah.
Okay.
Great
Awesome.
question.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about that. Just because like games in the woods, like that's the first thing I thought of, you know. So
Yeah.
I wanted to
They're
ask.
good times, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
useful because they're fun, you know. So we're gonna try and see how much of the design behind that we can elicit, so we can, you know, make our own.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, man.
All righty.
We'll see you on Wednesday.
See you Wednesday.
Hey, Lincoln, you got any questions for me, or you just away from your screen? If I don't hear from you in like 30 seconds or so, I'll go ahead and end the recording. Otherwise, speak now. All right.
Is my mic working?
It is now.
It's been a little buggy, so that's good. I was gonna say, due to some issues I was having last week, I don't feel particularly comfortable talking about. I was not able to get to any of the summer camp meetings. Okay. So maybe we could arrange something if you have the time.
Yeah, sorry I missed you. The first move is definitely to head to the website I've set up for it. So let me pull that up, and I'll paste the link in chat so that you can take a look at that stuff. I've posted our overall itinerary, the packing list. I recorded 2 of the 5 or 6 meetings from last week and the week before, just to kind of answer a bunch of the usual questions that people have. I also transcribed a bunch of those questions on this website and stuff like that. So that's going to be your first stop on all of that stuff. And the
Can I just say that this is like the lowest level of like mildly frustrating. I
What is?
was So my dad knows I like to travel and like to get out to nature. So he was kind of thinking maybe your graduation gift can be some money to go and do some of that. And I was
Oh,
planning
sweet.
something for the Southwest,
Okay.
but you've hit every major location above Arizona.
As one does.
So now I'm like, well, do I do something so I can hit the Arizona stuff because I still want to do that, or because that would be too short a trip, or like replan to my second plan, which was like Idaho and the Pacific Northwest, and I gotta make that
Also a
call.
good trip. Are you graduating this spring? Or like
No,
after summer camp?
next year.
Okay. Well, in that case, I was gonna say if you are getting ready to graduate, like right after summer camp, a couple of folks are gonna be rolling with us, and they're either taking summer camp right after spring semester, or they took it last spring. And as we sort of turn to go back east, back to Carbondale at the end, they're actually going to slingshot north and basically roll up California through the Sierras, and so forth, and end up in Washington State, doing kind of what you're talking about. So if that fits with you, we can set that up.
Seeing
It's
as
a
how
very
my summer
fuel
job
efficient way to
fell
do
through,
that.
I could probably do that.
Okay, so think about it. And yeah, so the 2 recorded meetings for this semester are both uploaded and transcoded to YouTube, and they're the very last thing on this super long page, which is, let's see, I'll put the address in chat here. You can just click the link and bookmark it because I'll be updating this. And I went ahead and started putting in some of the skills videos. Some of this stuff is going to be pretty basic for you. I know you're experienced as a scout, and counselor and all of this stuff. But for some of the folks who are trying some of this on for the first time, those will be helpful videos.
I do have a question.
And I'll be putting on a bunch more stuff as we go. So yeah,
and
that lines out our kind of everything as I know it so far.
Okay. There was one other thing, yes, to speak of time, because something that had me thinking about class. So I was watching a documentary this week, and it reminded me of, I think, one of the most interesting experiences I've had of seeing non-guided interpretership, a museum exhibit, essentially. Have you ever been to the Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas?
I have not. I've driven right by it, and the first time we passed by, I didn't even know it existed. And the second and third times, I knew exactly what we were driving by, and we didn't have time. Can you believe that?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
Hutchinson
right there.
is really interesting because it's a mining town and it's a farming town. It's got a bunch of elevators. So we were there, and they've got 2 really interesting museums because one of them is in a salt mine, and that was pretty cool. And it didn't have the greatest interpreter experience. Well, its guided stuff was really good, but its kind of walk around stuff was whatever they could drag from other parts of the mine. It's set up in the 30s to 50s area of the mine. It's kind of mined in that era, and you can actually see like a bunch of war era equipment that they left behind in trash piles.
Yeah.
But the Cosmosphere is really interesting because it really has like free exhibits. One on the Surveyor probes, one on the SR-71 because they have one of those.
Yeah.
And the entire rest of the museum is devoted to their space race exhibit. It starts at the V2 rocket and ends at Apollo Soyuz, and it just walks you through the whole thing. Not only from the American side, but the Russian side. Every step is a new spacecraft or concept they want to teach you, and they've got big like signs with like the dates on them. So while you'll be in a room bouncing around, you can just bounce around Mercury, but you can always know where you are in that progression. And it just slowly walks you through the whole program. And I got so many interesting stuff. I didn't get to see Liberty Bell 7 a second time because it was on loan at the time. It was in Indianapolis. Darn. I haven't seen it since I was like 9 when it was in Chicago. But that's one of the big ones. I did get to see Odyssey, which is the Apollo 13 command module. But yeah, they've got a lot of interesting stuff. And yeah, I've just never seen an exhibit quite like that because a lot of the stuff I see, like the really professional stuff that comes to like the Field Museum, is always a little jumbled. I never seen one with such a nicely constructed timeline to it. It's less. It's very much trying to tell a story, which I don't see a lot in museum exhibits, and it was something I thought it's now that I'm taking your class, it feels a lot more notable than I realized prior.
Yeah, we start off with all the staffed interpretation stuff so that people have a nice, long, comfortable runway to practice stuff, you know, as kind of much as you want for each different technique. And then, you know, more of the second half of the semester, as we're practicing this stuff, I'm taking us through a bunch of non-staffed interp stuff like, you know, visitor flow design in a zoo versus a museum style set of exhibits versus, you know, like a wayside or an outdoor thing. We'll talk about a bunch of this stuff. So to the extent that you have any, you know, photos or videos or even memorabilia of that trip, yeah, bring it on in. Like it's perfect for this class. So
Okay.
yeah, you're definitely responding to where we're going, and you're already kind of there in some ways. So I think this would be a fun spring for you.
Well, I'll see you on Wednesday.
All right, man. Glad to have you on summer camp. We'll see you on Wednesday.